Yeah. All right, great. Thank you. Welcome to the work session for our council meeting. Today is Tuesday, November 21st. We're happy to have you here. We will, just so people know, I know a lot of people here to talk about parking and some other things. Just as a matter of information, during the course of the work session, members of the audience, please just go ahead and listen. You'll get your opportunity to comment at the beginning of the regular meeting. We'll do a couple proclamations. But that also means, so just so the members of the Traffic Advisory Commission know, we can't make any decisions on your proposal because the public comment comes after your presentation. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, but I'm sure that there'll be lots of questions and discussion. All right, we're going to start, council. We do not have any board and commission interviews, but given, I'm going to reorder the agenda just a little bit and ask you about an appointment to a board and commission. We have two openings on the Green Space Advisory Commission. Ginger Garrett, who's currently Secretary of the Commission, has served 3 terms and wants to be reappointed. Per our current ordinance, we've advertised for 45 days without any new applicants. We have 2 vacancies, so even if somebody applied this week, there'd still be a vacancy. Would we like to reappoint Ginger to the Green Space Advisory Commission? I don't know, as liaison, if you want to make any comment or not.
Yeah, she's very active. And I think that would be great to reappoint her.
The only thing I wondered was that I saw that she put on her application that she might be interested in serving on a different board or commission instead, and wondered if with the amount of time she's had on that, if it might make more sense, but I don't know if we have openings on the others. But.
Could we go ahead and appoint her conditionally on that conversation? I'm happy to have that conversation with her. Is there anyone who objects to that? All right. All right, so we'll go ahead with issues and updates, and Emily, we'll start with you, please.
Sure. We have a Historic Preservation Commission met recently, and we talked about a couple of properties. I know we have 15 Marvin Court on the agenda for today, and then I think last meeting, I think I said 12 Elm or 12 North Euclid. It's 12 Euclid was the other property that we were talking about as well. That has been carried over to do more research on it, as it was a home of Walter Ambrose. So notable figure there. There's a opening on the Historic Preservation Commission, and then Green Space Committee met. There's an opening in addition to the one we talked about today. There's another opening on the Green Space as well, and we have a meeting tomorrow morning, Green Space and Public Works, to kind of do a debrief on the Green Our City initiative and kind of see, if they want to do things differently for the next time around. And those were my 2 commission updates. I do have a question about the process for sidewalks, but I don't know if this is the right time for that or if we want that someplace else.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So we are developing a process for sidewalks. We currently don't have one.
Okay, great. I thought we had one and I couldn't find it. So,
So did I.
so that's good. That is great. Yeah. So as you're developing that process, like, how do we, who can request it? What are the requirements? How, like, not for today, but like,
Sure.
all of those things would be helpful to have that process on the website. Cause I know that there are lots of people who ask that question and would be interested in it. I know that there are some requirements on, homeowners or property owners approving and things like that. So
We've developed a couple of processes for other things, so it'll probably be similar, but how many residents on the street want it, that all of that good
Yeah.
stuff.
okay, great. Thank you. That's all I have.
All right.
No updates.
What? Just want to give an update. I did attend the National League of Cities Conference in Atlanta this past week, and we did have some good conversations. Just a few highlights that I'm bringing back. I sat in a consistency group. Yes, group. It was the National Black Caucus of elected officials. And we did have 3 resolutions that we submitted. It was a resolution to Congress requesting the approval of housing vouchers for home ownership opportunities and local innovation in attainable housing. They started using the verbiage of attainable housing instead of affordable housing. And the difference between affordable housing and attainable housing, affordable housing is subsidized by the government or other entities to make it accessible for people with low incomes, while attainable housing is housing that is affordable for people around the area, medium income. So we started using that term. And affordable housing also usually has eligibility requirements around it, income, family size, and other factors. Where attainable housing is more market-driven and may include various types of housing, such as single homes, condos, apartments, and duplexes. So that's the direction that the National League of Cities is going. And then the second resolution was support of resources for community navigators to assist local entrepreneurs in assessing credit. And those community navigators are individuals that can help small businesses access resources and support what they need to make a successful business. So as, for example, SBA lending. And the third one is to bring awareness to enhance accessibility to outdoor spaces for all Americans, regardless of age, ability, or background, and how recreational activities is crucial for physical and mental well-being. So I was glad to mention, excuse me, our potential bond issue coming up, and that is our direction of what we're going to do. And they were really excited about all the things that we're going to be doing. Also, I think most of the information you get is outside the conference meetings and talking to other elected officials. Talked about six different cities. All of them was around about our size, and they had chosen the hybrid city council system for their charter. And each one that I asked said they selected the hybrid system to make sure every part of the city has a representative while keeping all council members accountable for the whole city. And also the reasoning was to increase the diversity and representation of council members from different parts of the city, especially those that have been historically underrepresented and marginalized. So I think we're moving in that direction as well. So that was good conversations.
So those cities were newly adopted hybrid
No.
systems, or this, okay.
They actually two out of the six I talked to, they maybe about 2 years ago that they adopted the hybrid system. Yeah, back in 1924, they went from all at large to hybrid. So that was interesting. So, and the cities, 4 out of 6 of the cities, if they went to a hybrid and they had at large and the wards or ward system, the individuals that were in the all at large, they had different requirements. For example, one city in Ohio, if it was at large, based on their population, actually, I think it was like 24,000, it's a little bit more. They had to gather 500 signatures, where the ones that was representing a ward or a district only had to get 100. So I don't know if we discussed that in our.
Yeah, we'll come back to this issue because it's on the agenda today during the regular meeting, so we'll have plenty of time to get into detail.
Yeah, so that was just some of the conversations and things we attended. Also like to thank the community as well for the donations to the Webster Rock Hill Ministries for the holidays, for Thanksgiving. As of this morning, we served 230 families that represented 687 individuals.
Right.
Yeah, so and we're still at it. So just want to thank the community for that. That's all I got.
I don't have any updates.
You took all the.
Is David, Mr.
That's
Franklin,
me.
are you with us? Do you have any updates
Yeah.
for us?
No updates from me, Madam Mayor.
All right. Mr. City Attorney,
I have no updates, Mayor.
Madam City Manager.
I do, Mayor. Thank you. City had a meeting this week with Waste Management. Wanted to share that. As community members know, there's been some waste management concerns. So the meeting hopefully was pretty productive. As people know, there were some contract changes and those contract changes did not go out to residents as they should have several months ago. So those contract changes will be going out, but probably more importantly, correcting some of the missed pickups, both residential within business districts. And there's just been some misinformation, which aligns with waste management's errors. So I'll just share now, in some neighborhoods, yard waste was not being picked up if it wasn't in the container. It is in the current contract that all yard waste will be picked up. It does not have to be in the container. So things like that, they're correcting, and hopefully we will start seeing some changes in that. And there's a few other things that I won't take the time to share, but please continue reporting your issues with waste management. We are working very hard to resolve them.
All right, thank you. Madam City Clerk, do you have anything?
No, thank you.
All right. Karen, hi.
Nope, I have nothing. We had no planning commission meeting or Parks and Rec since our last meeting.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the scouts of our community. That was, yeah, I guess yeah, that's a little intimidating even to me. So I wanted to say thank you to the scouts. Scouting for Food seemed to be a very big success this past weekend, and it's something they do annually that supports quite a few of our community members in the broader St. Louis area. So thank you to the scouts. Also, I and Councilmember Bliss went to the Metropolitan Sewer District informational meeting about their upcoming ballot initiatives in April to begin the process of community education. And this is going to be tough. They have two, and one of them, I mean, people need to understand that our MSD bills are going up no matter what we do in April. It's a question of managing how they go up, given that they're operating under judicial order at this point. So Dr. Peoples and I have talked about inviting MSD to have a community meeting here in Webster Grove so that people can learn more about what will be on the ballot and what they might like to do in terms of voting on that ballot initiative. So we will, we have until April, so we'll get something done in the later winter or early spring at that point. All right, I forgot to ask council members, is there anything anyone wants to review on the regular agenda? This is why I always forget it, because no one ever does. So we just move right along. All right, we will get to our first topic, which is the Traffic Advisory Commission parking proposal. Chairman Redford is here with us, and come on down and begin. And as you all hand off, however it is that you would like to, and I guess I'll ask your preference right now. Would you rather go through your proposal, or you want questions as things come up?
Questions at the end.
At the end? Okay, questions at the end it is. All right.
Okay, Madam Mayor, Madam City Manager, and council members, thank you all for this opportunity to talk about a project that we've been working on for some time. I would like to, before we start, I would like to briefly introduce some people. Clark Telling is our vice chair. Harry Falkenrath is also going to our group. Then I have two people who are also with us, Steve Rosicki and Susan Sunderman. So of the 7 people on our commission, you have 5 of us here this evening. Okay, I would like to begin.
We would like you to begin.
Why don't you just jump right in here? Because I think we're on the first slide anyway. They'll figure that out.
Okay, so this was my introduction slide. What I want to talk about first is how we got here. Over a year ago, we had 2 groups of citizens come before the Traffic Advisory Commission with requests. The first was a group of citizens who were very concerned about parking on narrow streets within the area near Webster Groves High School. And the streets are so narrow and the parking such that it's difficult for service vehicles, it's difficult for emergency vehicles.
to get down those streets. And so they were concerned about the safety of that condition and asked us if, we could do to help them. The second group that came before the Traffic Commission was a group of students at Webster Groves High School. And their complaint was that with the current parking restrictions, they have difficulty finding places to park close enough to the high school. So we looked into those two. May I have the next slide then? Okay, so, sorry, go back one. Okay. We began to look into that, and Carrie Falkenrath did a terrific job of
Can
studying.
you stay close to the microphone only so that the people who listen to the recording can hear you?
Okay,
Thank you very much,
thank
Chris.
you.
And I know you wanted to give Carrie credit, and thank you for doing that, but we need to be able to hear you.
Okay, so Carrie looked into the current ordinances and discovered something that we didn't expect, that we anticipated that there would be a normal process for how citizens come forward when they want to request special parking restrictions. In fact, that's not the case. They built up over a period of time on a kind of a case-by-case basis. So these three things are the things that we want to speak about tonight. Safety of the streets in the area around the high school and throughout the city. Equity in how the streets are, or how the parking is shared. And finally, transparency with regard to how we deal with these requests in the future. So I want to turn it over to Carrie first, and then Clark, and then I'll come back for a few minutes.
Thank you.
And I just want to hit on one thing as far as the transparency. What we do know in our committee, do I need to be, okay. What we
Or
do
you
know in
can,
our
you can pull it
committee,
towards you. You don't have to
Yeah.
stand on tippy toes or anything.
I'm used to that. Is that we get requests for stop signs, and we have a very clear written policy that was adopted in, I think, like 2009, that tells us the steps we need to go through when we review a request for stop signs. But there's nothing like that in terms of when we review a request for parking restrictions. So I wanted to talk next slide. When we talk about some of the concerns we were hearing from residents, from our neighbors, as far as safety and accessibility of streets, these are photos I took just last week on Webster streets in our community. There's measurements there at the bottom of each picture. So as you can see, an average passenger vehicle is 6 feet wide. A standard parking lane is 8 feet wide, and that gives you a little bit of buffer for things like rear view mirrors, cars that are slightly wider, although most are not. If cars aren't right on the curb, they're off the curb. As we all know, we don't always get there all the time. So those 8-foot lanes give you a little bit of a buffer for your parking. But you can see in that street in the top left, that's a 22-foot wide street. So, and right now there are 2 cars parked there, 2 larger vehicles. I'm not sure that that truck would be 6 feet wide. I did not check. I think I freaked the guy out by taking a picture. But, you know, if you're looking at 2, say 6 feet wide vehicles there, that's 12 feet. You've got 10 feet down the middle at most. And that's assuming both cars are on the curb. The street under that is 16-foot wide with a standard 6-foot wide-ish vehicle. You leave 10 feet to get around. That car is parked up actually in the landscape buffer between the sidewalk and the street to kind of create that bit of room. I will note the street on the left, on the top, is actually my street where I live. So I know that parking is permitted on both sides of the street. It does get utilized on both sides of the street, just like you see there. But as you can see in the picture, not everywhere. So there's gaps between the parked cars. And what this does is when you have 2 opposing vehicles trying to travel down the street, it gives you a place to pull over, let one pass. It's called a queuing street. It's actually a name for that. It's actually really good at calming traffic, just as an aside, because it makes you drive slow and it makes you take your turn. So it works on our street. I do hear my neighbors often, though, a little worried about kind of some of that room to get in between 2 parked cars. But as you can see at the picture on the right side, that street, although it's a little wider, it's heavily parked on both sides. And at 24-foot wide, 2 6-foot wide-ish cars, assuming they're both at the curb, is 12 feet. That leaves you 12 at most in the middle with no room to pull back and forth unless you can find an empty driveway space for cars to pass each other. So what we were hearing from our neighbors was this is a problem. Just like Chris said, we called actually the fire department, spoke to the fire department. We spoke to Waste Management. We asked them both, what's your widest vehicle? They both said just under 10 feet.
I will note the fire department said when the outriggers are just deployed, definitely more than 10 feet, but that's not in the midst of driving to travel down the street. So when you're looking at the possible 10-foot that's left between two parked cars on some of the street, this is where these concerns come from. And we hear about people losing rearview mirrors, and we hear about waste refuse trucks backing up when they hit a point of impasse. We actually received a photo from a resident of a bus that had backed down almost an entire block, a school bus, because it could not get through. And these are, I'm just trying to reiterate, kind of give an example of the concerns that we're seeing. So if we go to the next slide, when we started looking at a basis for kind of a policy, what we thought would be transparent and make sense and address these safety concerns that we were hearing is to make sure that any street that had parking also preserved a 10-foot width for those service vehicles and emergency vehicles to get through any time of day, anywhere they needed to go. And that's why you see there less than 18 feet. Our policy would say that we don't think parking is appropriate on either side of the street because you have an 8-foot parking lane and you have a 10-foot driving lane, and that is it. So if you have any cars parked there, you've lost kind of that driving lane, or at least cut into it for some section of the street. Then we went on to say a medium width street, 18 to 26. At 26 feet, you have two 8-foot parking lanes of 16. You've left a 10-foot in the middle. So anything less than that, you start parking on both sides and you start eating into that clear zone for a truck, a service truck, or a fire truck to be able to get through, or an ambulance. And then a wider street is anything greater than 26 feet. So that gives you plenty of room for those two 8-foot parking lanes, leaving you 10 feet in the middle at minimum for clear zone. And that's really the basis of our policy proposal, is that based on safety, leaving that 10-foot accessible path for these trucks that need to get down our streets. So the next slide is just kind of some really great kind of visual examples. A lot of people are visual thinkers. A lot of people in our committee are visual thinkers. Just kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. So being able to park a car and get a truck through. And all three, you can flip through those. It's very similar, but it's just kind of showing all three widths and what that looks like. I think this is where I turn it over to Clay.
Great, thank you. So I get to talk about the equity portion of our proposal. We struggled with this word a little bit. We thought fairness was what we were going to use first, and we kept hearing life isn't fair. So we looked at equity, and equity really means fair, just, and impartial. So that's really what our proposal is trying to project: fairness, impartiality, and being just. In the past, as Chris touched on, there was no consistent policy or criteria that we could find when requests would come to our commission. So it was really done on a case-by-case basis. And over the years, it was done differently, and different lenses looked at those and made policies based on, you don't really know how they made those decisions. This really illustrates what I'm talking about, and you all have this in your packet, but that in the center of that photo is the high school, and just north of that is Lockwood. And all the colors around, I think there's 13 of them, are different ordinances for different restrictions. And some of these signs capture it, like no parking from 7 to 4, Monday through Friday, or no parking from 8 to 9, 2 to 3 on school days, or resident only. There's 13 different of those ordinances around, just around the high school. So when we talk about equity, what we want to get across is that public policies, I think we've all of us that have studied history know that on a city, state, and federal level, public policies have put in place that were not fair to everyone. They were intentionally put in place and created systems of unfairness that today we're trying to take some of those things away from all kinds of parts of public policy. We're only talking about parking and Webster growth, but we think that public policy should be enacted that does have fairness in mind when it's enacted. Second bullet that's really important to us is that we believe that the publicly funded streets and parking belong to everybody. They don't belong to who owns that house. They don't belong to that restaurant. Public parking, public streets belong to everybody, not to any one individual. The third bullet here is that it does make sense in some cases to make restrictions. And they are appropriate in certain cases. So for instance, if you live in an area that butts up against a high density area, we think it does make sense in those cases to be able to preserve some of that parking for residents. I think a good example is we all know that we preserve some parking for people with disabilities. That's an appropriate use of preserving parking. So our policy has, in those high density areas, has the ability to protect some of that street parking for residents. And then the fourth bullet is that we believe this takes most of the subjectivity out of making some of these decisions. And we think that's really important, like the stop sign example that Gary gave. We think that we need that kind of a policy that when requests come to us, that we can look and say, oh, is your street 18 feet or 20, 6 feet or so forth. So those are the four things in our section. And then the next slide is just a quick illustration, the one above that. One more above that.
Excellent. There you go.
This is just a quick illustration of what a shared street could look like, where there is. Okay.
Big green.
This is just an illustration of what a shared street could look like.
Hey, Clark.
Yeah.
Clark, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Can you come to the microphone a little closer? I'm sorry.
You can come closer.
Marie just turned it on. Is that better, David?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I got excited. I turned it off. I'm sorry. This is an illustration of what a shared street could look like, where a third to a half of the parking is reserved for residents and the rest is open parking. And that's really depends on the density of the street, and all those details are in the proposal, but this is just an illustration. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Chris.
Okay, next slide, please. So this is a bit busy, this slide, so let me just explain. In our modern society, we have become accustomed to processes. When we want to ask a question of our government, or we want to ask a question or a favor of an organization, we know that there's a process for that. We know that there's probably a document that I need to fill out, that there are criteria that I need to meet, that when I've met those criteria and I've made my request, there are rules and that people follow, and those rules are equitable and fair for everyone. That's the way we do things, whether we're talking about signing up for the pool for the summertime, or whether we're getting a driver's license, or we're submitting for Social Security. Those are the things that we do in our society today. What we want is a process that is transparent like that. So all our citizens know, if I have a problem with parking on my street, I know what I need to do. I submit a request. I submit the criteria. The organization, our Traffic Advisory Commission, would review that request, make sure that you meet all those criteria, and then we would suggest that those changes be made. So that's what we mean when we say transparent, a process that everyone sees and knows and works with. So we're finished. We would. Do you have the next slide? Yes, there we go.
Good. All right. So one housekeeping note, I just, for the sake of public disclosure, would like everyone in the room to know that I live on Mason Avenue, which is one of the streets impacted potentially by this proposal. I think it's only fair that everybody understands that during the course of the discussion. Questions from council?
I have a list. Do we want?
I have a list too. So
Okay.
you,
So in the proposal, it talks about having a request come from, I think, somebody who's on the street. typically.
microphone for you too, please.
Is it not? Is that better? David, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well, Emily.
Okay. So as to who can submit a request, does it have to be someone who lives on that street? Can it be someone who wants to park on that street? Can it be anyone, or does it have to be someone who owns property on that street to submit a request to change the parking on
I
their street?
think we've talked about this, and our belief is that everyone owns that street. And so the individuals who might want to come and park on that street have as much right to make a request as the individuals who live
Okay.
on that street.
No, that's helpful. When I read it through, it was sounded different. Okay. Uh, is there a place where people can find the width of their streets? Do we have is that like a,
Google Maps,
does it have widths on it?
you could do a tape measure.
Okay.
I mean, that's the best.
It's Google Earth, like,
Or Google
yeah,
Earth.
Google Earth. That's how we had to get it. We weren't allowed to go out and collect actual measurements on the street.
Google Earth and use the tape measure. Okay.
So
that's-
can I ask a related
Yeah.
question? So maybe can group some of these that are similar
Yeah.
together. Do we have any idea how many so the only streets, as I understand the proposal, that would have two side parking on them are those that are 26 feet and wider? Do we have any sense of those, since we've put this in the context of the high school, although I want to have a broader discussion as well? Do we have any idea how many of the streets surrounding the high school have 26 feet width or greater?
That's a great obvious question, and we do not have that information. We were told that that any measurements that we made would not be official.
Official? Okay.
And therefore, we would have to do that through the city, the
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That answers the
Public
question.
Works.
Yeah.
what happens if residents don't agree? Like, some people want to switch to the updated parking and some people like it the way it is, and you've got like a disagreement. Does the new policy
So
override anything, or is there like a
we would,
dispute process?
that's another great question. If there's any concern about that, we would go and poll the people who live on that street. Because, I mean, ideally, they would come as a group to our commission and make that request. But if there's any doubt, we would poll that street.
Okay, but that's not in the policy as it's written right now.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
we have-
I think
oh,
the
David.
policy has discretionary built in though. So I still think this isn't removing discretion from either the police officers, from the firefighters' opinions, from the city manager, or from city council. There's still discretion. So while I think this is a policy, not in a guideline, more than this is per se, every street has to be passed. This is creating that fairness and equity for going forward while also providing the discretion that's necessary.
Thanks, David. Do you agree with that statement that you just made?
Yeah.
So then I'm going to ask a related question again, just to try and keep things together. Most of what we've referenced in terms of these parking regulations are currently in ordinance. And I've seen this called a policy. I've seen it called a guideline. What we've got now are ordinances, which is actually public law. What exactly in those categories is the commission asking for?
Can I go ahead? We didn't talk to the city attorney, so we sort of are leaving that, I guess, up to you guys, right?
Okay.
Is that?
What we do have is a stop sign policy. So our thought is this is something similar to that policy, that it's guidelines and criteria for us. It's a working document for our commission to make decisions by. So-
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Do we have any streets that would have increased parking that you've identified, that have no parking now and would go to one, or that have one parking on one side that might end up parking on two sides, or do we anticipate any of that?
Potentially we would, yes.
Okay.
I mean, Mayor Arnold mentioned Mason, which has parking restrictions on both sides. So I want to circle back if I can real quick too to the ordinances.
Mhm.
It would be great as we continue along, regardless of the outcome of this policy discussion, if we could, as a commission, we have some questions about the ordinances, because some of the things in the ordinances don't seem to fit. Like residential reserved parking, there are places for it within the ordinances, and then there's also places where it just exists. So I think these are places too where, just in terms of transparency and trying to kind of help us understand and clean it up, would be great for a future discussion.
And then I think my last one is, do we have any on the list that we already know we want to start with, or we're only starting with those that are brought forward from this point forward?
That is a great question. And we do intentionally have written this in a way that nothing takes place when the first question comes forward. So we would not, suddenly change all the parking regulations throughout this area or throughout the city. We have to have someone request them. A citizen, a resident would have to make a request. We would then do the investigation and then make a recommendation.
Thank you.
So just again, jumping off on that, let's just go through a hypothetical because I can see most of my neighbors sitting in the audience right now. And so it might be helpful for people who are here to understand if we walk through this together.
Sure.
You up for that? Okay. So right now, as Carrie noted, we have restrictions on both sides of the street on Mason Avenue. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that tomorrow we come up with a policy that matches what you're asking to do.
Mhm.
Would that mean that ordinances or that the parking policies on Mason change immediately?
No.
Okay. Would it mean that a group of Webster Groves High School students could come to you and say, hey, let's change this on Mason Avenue?
I would hope they wouldn't say, let's change it. I would hope they said, let's look at it.
Okay,
together.
however they say,
But
okay,
yes, they could
Okay.
come forward and say, we know this street is, well, we would allow them to look at that again, yes.
Yeah. So let's say that you as the Traffic Advisory Commission then decided that it fit the criteria
Mhm.
for, say, the parking on both sides of the street. Mason's a wide street, so it could be 24, it could be 26. I don't know which one it is. I didn't go out and measure myself either.
It's 28 or more.
Okay, well, there you know. All right, so it fits the 26 or more criteria.
Yes,
So then you make a recommendation that under your plan would say resident parking on one side of the street and anybody parks on the other side of the street. Is that correct so
that's
far?
correct.
All right, please go ahead.
But there's another little issue. If there are places along that street that are already designated for pickup and drop off of students, maybe at an elementary school,
We'll get to that in a minute.
okay. So, but I mean, that's a legitimate reason. I think Clark mentioned it in the presentation. There are legitimate reasons for parking restrictions, and
Yeah.
that's one of them.
Okay,
Okay?
so let's continue our hypothetical. You all have made a recommendation to go to two sides of the street, one resident, one not anybody.
Open.
Yeah, open, shared, whatever the right word is that I'm looking for right now. You then, I think, said at that point, you would poll residents to find out whether they agreed with changing those restrictions. Is that correct?
So the issue is that sometimes an individual will come forward. We don't know if that individual's input is representative of their neighbors. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But we wouldn't want to re-sign that entire street only to find out that the other 7 people on the street don't want that. So we feel the need to find out if that's a shared feeling that street should be changed.
Well, remember, in this hypothetical, it wasn't somebody on the street who asked for it.
I think we've all struggled with this hypothetical.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll note too,
Yeah.
so implementation right now, say with something like a stop sign is, we look at our criteria, we make our recommendation to council, but it has to be made an ordinance, right, to be legal? So we're talking about either new ordinances for parking restrictions or revised ordinances. So our, I guess, understanding is somewhere in that ordinance process whereby you all approve an ordinance or approve a revision to an ordinance, there will be an opportunity for public comment, whether that's to us or that's to you. The implementation part, I think, is what we don't exactly know how
Okay.
you all would want to work that. Right now, we just send a stop sign to you and you take it from there. This may be the same or it may be different.
Okay, thank you. That helps me a lot and hopefully some other people. Are there other questions?
Sure. Go ahead. I have a question about the commission itself and the decision to have that be the destination for the applications or the appeals, and kind of what's the thinking behind having traffic advisory be the recipient of those requests?
That's why we exist,
Or parking restrictions?
parking and traffic and
But for you,
stop signs and all that, I mean, that's what comes to us every month.
okay.
Or,
I guess my question is because today, the way that the commission is set up, we don't have, I don't believe, like professional requirements around kind of who serves.
We
And
do not.
This feels like a new frontier, frankly, for the commission to take on something this large.
and Sarah, I think we're trying to put a guideline that we can look through a lens when a request does come to us to say, yeah, this makes sense. It fits within our guidelines.
Okay. So we're not talking about something as strict, say, as the Architectural Review Board, where if there's a variance, we have to go, there's a process to kind of like get that approved outside of the guidelines. We're not talking about guidelines that strict. We're talking about just a general overall guideline. Okay. That was one of the questions that I had. And I guess my other question is, it feels like there's two different kinds of requests you're going to get, which is the please make parking more restricted on my street and please lessen the restrictions on my street. And I guess I'm a little confused about if those would end up with the same process, because it seems like there's a different, maybe bent for each of those. I recently had a parking change on my street that was a surprise to me. I think there's, I think there's some concern I have, I guess, about, I know there's a need to be transparent. But I also feel like there's a case by case element to this that's important. And so it concerns me that Chief Curtis isn't 100% on board with this overhaul. And I hope we'll get to hear from him maybe at some point to speak about that. Because I think at the end of the day, the police department is who you need to have on your side, because that's where the enforcement is going to come. So those are my thoughts at the moment.
Thank you. Emerson.
My one question is on page 1, you says in the last paragraph, as anticipated, the effect of these restrictions was to spread the impact to a wider area and include the Webster Groves High School student parking. As we all know, student parking has been an issue for many years around the high school. So were the administrative staff of the high school brought to the table, and what were their comments?
Yeah, we did interact with them. We've been told a few things. So they have rented leased space for additional parking in the past at a church that wasn't utilized. We don't really know the details though on whether there was a cost for it or how far away it was or anything like that. But they are interested in working with us. Some of the things we've heard from residents is, we've heard both. We've heard some residents say when there's parking on the street, there's noise and there's trash. And we've heard other residents say that the kids are very polite. And sometimes when they do that, they're told to stop and they never see it again. So, but we did kind of reach out to the school and talk about somewhat more of a public information campaign and trying to remind our students to be good neighbors and things like that. But we do want to point out, and I think our PowerPoint's already closed, we had some really good slides kind of addressing this topic. We keep hearing that this is a high school problem that the high school should solve, but the high school is a public institution that's publicly funded. So for them they can't change tuition to build a parking garage. They would need a vote of approval from the voters of Webster Groves to do that. And I think we all know that the chances of them getting a voter approval for a parking garage are slim. So they're also a public service. They're a public partner, not a public kind of commodity. They're here for us. They serve us. So we felt that this is a two-way street, that all of the parking for the high school shouldn't be on the high school to somehow create space out of thin air within the high school. But as far as, we have had those conversations with them, but they're almost at an impasse. They don't have the funding to create additional parking.
So will the high school be gaining spots or losing spots?
And
Neither.
yeah,
They'd stay the same. The high school spots would stay the same, their lots.
No, I mean outside, the
On the
ones that
street.
park on the public streets.
There theoretically would be more spots available for high school students to park on nearby streets that are now restricted.
And I think the community would be safer too. We got that email today. Swan Avenue.
Dave, we can't
Or,
understand.
Yeah, David, you're breaking up. So
I
could
think
you
that's the
start
whole
again,
entire
please?
city.
David,
Yeah, all
we
I
can
was
hear-
saying was, I think that of all things, I think this makes the community safer. I mean, we got that email today about Swan Avenue. I think what this does is shift the burden and share the burden a little bit more effectively and fairly.
That's what I was gonna say. I think your comment, will there be more or less? Some streets right now, like Swan, in that picture, by the way, I showed with the 2 double parked all the way down with Swan. That's what they have every day during school. But under our policy, they wouldn't be wide enough for 2 parking lanes. So some of that parking for students would go away, but would get shifted to streets that are plenty wide to accommodate 1 to 2 lanes of parking on the street. So that's what our comment about spreading that load among various streets rather than kind of concentrating it all on just a few streets.
So that consideration for losing spots and gaining spots, you say is a wash? Or will be a greater demand for more student parking because they've lost some?
At this point in time, we can't answer that question. We haven't measured the streets to know which ones get bigger and and we don't know how many citizens are going to come forward. So it's very difficult for us to estimate whether we're going to gain or lose.
Hey, Chris, what was that statistic you shared at the last Traffic Advisory Commission about the number of students that drive to school compared to in the past?
Yeah, I can talk to that. Back in the 60s, about 16% of high school students drove to school. Today, it's 32%. The high school, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, but the high school has about 210 parking spots. But given the number of junior and senior, thank you. Okay. So yeah, 16% in the 60s drove to school. Today, the number is 32%. There are, or were last year, 1,061 students who had driver's licenses. And if 32% of those drove to school, we would need 350 parking spots. The school now has 210. So you're about 140 parking spots shy of what you need to park everyone, every student driver at Webster.
And that's actually the low end because that's a national,
Yeah,
that's a national figure. So we think that more students drive.
this is a fairly well-to-do community. More students have cars, so that.
So that actually leads me to a related question. I'm still trying to keep mine with you all. In some ways, that data makes me think or ask the question, is essentially trying to open as much parking as possible for high school students consistent with our sustainability goals and our goals about walkability and bikeability that we have? Because one of the things that always comes up in discussions with the high school is, can we do something to help them encourage carpooling more? And I know you do get an advantage in buying a parking pass if you agree to drive somebody else. So I know they're working on that to some degree, but I'm just trying to see how these two things fit together.
We agree with you. We've had those conversations. And as we continue to work with the school, that would be another thing that we would propose to them. But at the same time, we've had the discussions that it's unfair to say we want sustainability. High school kids make it happen.
Yeah.
And we have parking here for you, but we're not going to let you use it because we want you to ride bikes instead. So we're trying to balance that equity kind of factor into it. But at the same time, yes, we would love to see the school kind of push out some more sustainability, some non-motorized options for students to get to and from school.
And I guess that's my question, was any of those ideas brought to the table for the school district? And how did they react?
I think they're interested in sharing that with their students, but they can't make they've shared it before in the past. We share it with adults and we don't do it either. So I think they're interested but as far as some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Something to entice, in some sort of incentive. There's not a lot of incentives to give to a high school student to not drive their car so they can come home from practice in the dark or something like that. So
Emerson, I reached out to the school district to invite them to the Traffic Advisory Commission and be a little bit more frank. And I think the members of the commission wasn't impressed. Like a desire to solve the problem. I mean,
David,
let's
you're
not
breaking
forget that
up.
this buck has been passed for a long time. I'm sorry, I'm driving. I'm saying that
Don't drive and
I
do
think
this,
the buck has
please.
been passed for. Oh no, I'm not driving myself.
Ironic.
I'm sorry. But the buck has been passed for so long. Let's not forget that they just ran out for a bond without even accounting for this parking issue, even though it's been well known. So despite best efforts, like we do on a lot of things, I think we tried to collaborate, but there was no ideas. There was no good concrete solutions.
All right, thank you. Pam, do you have questions or
I don't have any
comments?
questions.
Karen? All right, I have a couple more. We might actually make this on time. So let's move away from the high school for the time being.
Yes.
The other place that we typically have a fair number of parking restrictions are around business districts and residents who border business districts. And I assume that the hypothetical that we talked about, the same is true for around the business districts.
Absolutely.
So in other words, again, a business owner could come to a residential street, to come to you for a residential street and say, there's too much restricted parking on Bompart, because we know we have Bompart restrictions a couple blocks down from Old Orchard, and say, hey, we want the shared policy enacted there. Works the same way.
Yes.
Right? So when we talk about the notion that this is only going to impact around the high school, that is simply not true. That also probably means we have a whole bunch of residents who have no idea what we're talking about right now in terms of that. And I guess I would like, we have a responsibility to residents, constituents, not just because they voted for us or against us, but just because we should see what everybody's interests are. Are we ready to do this without further community outreach to talk to people about what it means if you live around a business district, as well as things like I said, I'd bring it up again, a school drop-off pickup. If we go back to the Mason Avenue, or we can go to Joy Avenue, the same side of Holy Redeemer. We have Holy Redeemer and the high school both having drop-off and pickoff. They're not exactly the same, but they overlap enough in terms of behavior that it's really challenging. We'd probably have the same kind of thing with Bristol and some of the old Webster Business District things. So I guess my real question to you is, do you think you're close, or do you think we should to what you want to propose, or do we need some more broader public engagement about this?
I do want to touch on one of the things you just mentioned. So the existing ordinances have two places where they cover residential reserved parking. And one of them is congested districts, which are very clearly labeled in the ordinances, and they are Old Orchard, just that, the section of Big Bend through Old Orchard. They're all of Old Webster, like a very large portion of it.
I think a little bit of Crossroads too.
And then actually Kirkham, which is interesting to me, but Kirkham, just west of Rock Hill Road. So that's all in any resident right now can go in and find that. It's labeled in there what those congested districts are. Those are the places, if you're within 300 feet within them, or within 300 feet, you can ask for residential reserve parking. So I think all of that's out there now. I'm not sure that we need to educate more, I guess, than what's already there in the.
But what I'm suggesting is, it sounds like the policy you're proposing would change some of that.
I don't believe that would change that. I think what it does do, though, is right now, only people within those designated areas can ask for residential reserved or shared parking on their street. We're really just opening the playing field to say, if I live in South Webster, which I do, across from Southwest Park, which I do, and the Hawken House has a lot of traffic and there's a lot of sports traffic on the weekends, I can get shared parking on resident reserved parking on my street, even though I'm not in that commercial boundary border.
Right.
So I think and this is where I think we had some questions again on implementation and how exactly that would work, because we do have ordinances in place. So there needs to be a how we mesh these together. But I think we're trying to follow the same kind of process that's there by making it a little more transparent.
Yeah.
That's just the first half of what we're talking about.
So To answer your question from my perspective, I think we're close. The problem is that this is a fairly complex little area to deal with. And there are many other players involved. Public Works is one. So we're not exactly sure how to write this so that it works with the current system that we have. And we're trying to get some support from the city so that we can then meet with the other people and fine tune this policy that we're after.
Well, I would hope you would, I mean, we're going to hear some public comments. We've had discussion about a number of issues that some of us have raised, and I hope that would be incorporated in anything. And I just will say for the people in the room as well, whatever recommendation you make, we still may change it.
Yes.
And that is certainly an option because it is a recommendation.
Right.
More questions?
I don't have any other questions, but would like to put Chief Curtis on the spot. Just to make some comments. I have read his memo, but just like to hear from the chief on his thoughts.
Before we do that, I will, however this turns out, I know that your commission, traffic advisor, yeah, it is a commission, not a board, has put an extraordinary amount of time and thought into this. And so I am grateful for that. I may not end up agreeing with you, but at the same time, you have worked hard at this and we are all grateful for that as well.
And can I tender an offer? In the event that you have, if there's something you want me to look at to ensure consistency regarding our policies and our ordinances, I'm happy to do that. Just somebody reach out and I'll get together, because rather than have you guys beat your head against the wall, sort of trying to figure that out, I mean, it's kind of what I do.
I think we respect that, but it's hard to come to you with a, what if we did this and what if we did that?
Well, that's not as hard as you might think, and I'm happy to help is what I'm saying. So if you
Okay.
think of a place where I can be useful, please let me know that.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Chief Curtis, would you mind joining us here at the front of the room, please? You didn't think we were going to let you retire without putting you through the ringer at least one more time. Emerson?
Thanks, Mayor. I'll try and be brief with the comments.
you.
As I noted in the memo, and I really do appreciate the work of the Traffic Commission, because the time that we spent, this is a very complex issue. I don't know that's ever going to be solved. There is no ideal solution to it. I know that's ever going to be solved. The high school is going to have students. The drivers are going to continue to park on the streets, which is one of the reasons why we have a number of ordinances. And I agree and support their general principle that they have with the policy, if it's a policy going forward. I also agree with the transparency and agree with the equity, but it's not equitable to put the burden of student parking on residents in that area when people in other parts of the city don't experience the same kind of inconveniences. So we've tried to look at it, not in a piecemeal fashion, but as we've gotten complaints. And one of the things that you've alluded to is what we look at is when someone comes in with a request, usually if it's just an individual or two individuals, it doesn't get a lot of traction. What we ask them to do, and it's with the liaison, which is Captain Perks. And that's one of the things where they can work through him with the city attorney if they need to get information. But what we ask them to do is to submit a petition, to go to their neighbors and say, this is what we would like to do. We'd like you to sign a petition to support it. So if we get a good majority of the neighbors that are asking for something, we take a pretty hard look at it. And that's how most of the piecemeal restrictions were implemented. The resident reserve parking, certainly something that we can look at in other areas, but that was directed at the congested areas and also Webster University, especially at the time before they had the garage, when the residents came en masse and said, we just don't have parking on the street. The students are taking it over. And even though it's a public street, it's not fair to put the burden of all that parking on the people who live right next to the university, nor is it, I think, fair and equitable to put the burden of the student parking on the side streets. Now, if they don't meet the restriction, what we tried to do was, okay, if we put a restricted hours parking to say 7:30 to 9:30 or 8 to 9, that's going to keep the students for the most part from parking there, but it opens the street up to the public for the rest of the day and people from throughout the city can come and park there. And that was the strategy and the thought behind that. So I do support in general the policy moving forward. I think it would be a mistake to try and overturn what's in place now because There is no perfect solution. Not everybody's happy with it, but it's worked fairly well. It has nothing to do with not wanting change. I think that when someone wants something or they feel it's inconvenient, they can come to us, and if they have a petition of the majority of people in that area, we can take a hard look at it. And I think it should, in most of those cases, it was approved. So that's where we are on it. Like I said, there is no perfect solution to it, unfortunately.
All right,
Thank you,
thank
Chief.
you.
Thanks. Chief.
All right. We are going to take a 3-minute break here before we get to our regular meeting. I will say, since many of you have arrived, if you would like to speak during the public comment time, if you'll fill out a card, they're located right on the table as you walk in. You can just put them on the end of the dais here. We have a couple of proclamations, and then we will get right to public comment time, so you all can make your comments at that point in time. But you do need to fill out a card. Please do that for me. So we will break just briefly for a couple of minutes, and we'll be back to get going. Without Councilmember Bliss, that would have been bad.
Community Connect that had a picture of it. I realized, but they had the.
Oh, yeah, this belongs to me. Okay, welcome to the regular meeting of the City Council of the City of Webster Groves for Tuesday, November 21st. They just keep rolling in. All right. We welcome questions, ideas, and comments from persons in attendance. Members of the audience may, however, only comment when recognized by the mayor. If the mayor, well, no, the mayor's not absent, so that doesn't matter. We ask that comments be limited to 3 minutes. That'll be a strict 3 minutes because I've got a lot of cards in my hand. So please do and feel free to use less than 3 minutes if you have, if you can be a little concise. I can't, but maybe some of you can. And then, so I think we have no public hearings today, so all the comments from the public will come during the public comment period. Before we get to that, we have two things to do, and the first thing that is the roll call.
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Arnold,
Here.
Councilmember Bliss. Here. Councilmember Franklin.
Here.
Yes. Okay. Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Alexander.
Here.
Councilmember Richardson.
Here.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Here.
All right, we have two proclamations today to recognize important milestones or events in our community. The first is for Native American Heritage Month, and so I will read this proclamation. Whereas November is designated as Native American Heritage Month, this observance commemorates the history, heritage, and culture of Native Americans and Alaskan Natives. And whereas these commemorations allow our nation to pause and reflect upon the profound ways the first Americans have shaped our country's character and culture as the first stewards of our environment and early voices for the values that define our nation. And whereas today in their spirit and many contributions continue to enrich our communities and strengthen our country, we honor their legacy. Whereas as we celebrate the rich traditions of the original people of what is now the United States, we cannot forget the long and unfortunate chapters of violence, discrimination, and deprivation they had to endure. Whereas today, as the community and tribal leaders, members of our armed forces, and drivers of progress and economic growth, American Indians and Alaskan Natives are working to carry forward their proud history. Whereas we owe it to Native peoples to continue in our efforts to create a community that fully empowers them to live and thrive, to promote visibility of the rich diversity of Native cultures, and to address the tragedies of the missing and killed Indigenous peoples and the generations of children lost to boarding schools. And whereas during Native American Heritage Month, the City of Webster Groves recognizes and celebrates the culture and heritage of Native Americans and reaffirms our appreciation of the ideals which our first Americans held dear. Now therefore I, Laura Arnold, Mayor of the City of Webster Groves, and the entire City Council do hereby proclaim the month of November 2023 as Native American Heritage Month and urge the residents of our community to celebrate Native Americans and Alaska Natives for the contributions to our country. Correct. Second proclamation on a very different theme is recognition of our small businesses and Small Business Saturday, which is coming up soon. Whereas the city of Webster Groves, Missouri celebrates our local small businesses and the contributions they make to our local economy and community. And whereas according to the U.S. Small Business Administration, there are 33 million small businesses in the United States. Small businesses represent 99.7% of firms with paid employees. Small businesses are responsible for 62.7% of the net new jobs created since 1995. And small businesses employ 46.4% of the employees in the private sector in the United States. And whereas 60 cents of every dollar spent at a small business in the United States stays in the local community, and every dollar spent at small businesses creates an additional 48 cents in local business activity as a result of employees and local businesses purchasing local goods and services. And 72% of consumers reported that Small Business Saturday made them want to shop and dine at small, independently owned retailers and restaurants all year long. And whereas the city of Webster Grove supports our local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our communities. And whereas advocacy groups, as well as public and private organizations across the country, have endorsed the Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday, now therefore I, Laura Arnold, Mayor of the City of Webster Groves, and the entire City Council do hereby proclaim November 25th as Small Business Saturday in the city of Webster Groves and urge the residents of our community and communities across the country to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and to shop small throughout the year. Yay, small. All right, thank you. We will proceed to our remarks from the community and visitors. I will read your name from the cards that have been submitted to me. And then if you will come forward and speak into the mic, we're going to ask you to state your name and your address. And then you have your 3 minutes, and we look forward to hearing from you. And we will start with Monica Hawkins.
I live on Joy Avenue, which is right close to Holy Redeemer. It's also close to the high school. And one thing that we haven't really had any discussion on tonight is Webster University. So there's 3 schools very close together. I've lived here 20 plus years, and prior to our ordinances, we had insane parking on our streets. So just to think that it would go back to this after having order on our streets for probably 15 years is really sad. And it makes me as a resident very sad to live here. So the consideration is certainly appreciate the safety, the equity, and the transparency discussed. But number one, the safety for Holy Redeemer students and parents going there. You know, high school students are one thing, but also Webster U, if there's free parking on our street, that should be taken into consideration because a lot of them park elsewhere. But I know as a college student, if I had access to free parking, I would certainly partake in that rather than paying for a garage. So that's one thing that has not been discussed in the safety. But, you know, when we had parking on our street, there was a lot of disrespect with trash and not looking out for the younger students and the true safety of those kids walking to school, which is what a lot of Holy Redeemer kids do. You know, and it goes along with kind of the illegal parking, maybe blocking a driveway or whatnot. That just goes with that. The other thing that was brought up was the equity, and I'm all for fairness, but it's not going to be fair to all the residents of Webster Groves because our street is in close proximity to 3 schools. So we're not looking at, it's not fair to look at where the bulk of the traffic is going to be, because more than likely it will be on Joy and Mason. If I'm a kid walking to school, I want the closest spot. So that's another thing. And, you know, prior to this ordinance, we had all these issues. It's really sad to think we'd have to go back to those. Finally, the transparency side of things. It was stated by someone that there has not been there's no allocation for parking. Well, perhaps that needs to be revisited because the school has a lot of money. They're allocating it towards sports fields, they're allocating towards additions and different things. And maybe I challenge, I don't know this, but perhaps they need to look at allocating for parking instead. Webster University does have a lot of open parking. They could have some fiscal consideration with Webster University, or there's other areas that I would ask to be looked at before putting that all on the streets and basically impairing the safety of the Holy Redeemer.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Next card is Trisha Warner. And if anyone's asking, there's no particular order to this. They just got handed to me.
Good evening. My name is Trisha Warner. I live at 107 Joy near the high school. Obviously, it's no secret that Webster Groves High School students have been using residential streets to park every day from 8 until 3 for decades. Imagine every day rushing off to school wondering where you'll end up parking your car for that day. No wonder the students and the parents are upset that the streets closest to the high school have parking restrictions. Any and all frustrations should be directed to the Webster Groves High School for not implementing a solution to their parking problem years ago. Where is Webster Groves High School in administration tonight? The laissez-faire approach to their students' parking needs is really pitting residential streets against each other and students and parents against residents who, like me, live adjacent to the high school. I'm not here tonight to just protect my street from the obvious safety and equity concerns of student parking. I'm here to protect all of our residential streets from being the parking lot for Webster Groves High School. After hearing the public comments from the Sylvester residents at the September 18th traffic advisory meeting regarding student parking and traffic issues happening on their street and on East Swan going west, it's really shameful that relief has not been provided to Sylvester and East Swan long before now. The same reasons that employees in a business district must use the employee lot to park all day, or that customers, the lifeblood of these same businesses, are time restricted, is so that there is available parking for others to use. I understand that the streets belong to everyone, but the Traffic Advisory Commission's proposal allows high school students to unfairly occupy all the available parking near the high school all day long on our residential streets, leaving really no parking available for anyone else. The responsibility of solving the parking issues rest with Webster Groves High School. And I hope the city council takes the necessary steps to ensure that happens. And I know there's a lot of residents near the high school that have a lot of ideas that we can offer the high school to solve their parking issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Julie Stanley.
Hello, my name is Julie Stanley and I live at 25 Mason. I wanted to mention that I disagree that the parking problem is not a school district issue. As Police Chief Curtis, he's exactly right. It is not fair or equitable for the residents in close proximity to the high school to take all the parking. It won't be shared because kids want to park close to their high school. It's just the way it is. I realize that Mason is currently has restrictions, and it's just pushing the problem like Orchard wants restrictions. Everybody, I know, pushes it, and it's not fair. Everyone should be able to park in front of their house. And it goes back to it being a school district problem. The other, comment I want to make is that I have high schoolers, had high schoolers, and it's not fair for them to worry about having a place to park. They need to be able to go to school and learn. And I think that that makes it a school district problem. There's plenty of money for other events and fields and theaters for the school district. And so I think that they need to make it a priority to take care of their students and help them with parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Zach, I'm going to do my best here. Bodendijk? Bodendijk? Bodendijk. All right, thank you.
Zach Bodendijk. I live on at 212 East Swan. So I'm one of the residents who consistently has seen the vehicles having to back down a block, which is a little entertaining from my office. I can't lie, but it's also very nerve-wracking. Especially then when I see some of the vehicles driving the way they do, knowing that I have 3 young kids walking around. It's not always the most comfortable. So, you know, there's obviously been a lot of talk about, well, what's equitable? What's right? What's the perfect solution? And Mayor, you asked, is this ready to be implemented? What we have right now might not be, but something has to change. And there will not be one answer that everybody's going to say, that's perfect. High fives all around. Wonderful. We know we will not get there. But what we can do is begin the process. And what I was hearing from the TAC talking about, we need a standard policy. We need a way that residents can elevate this, where it's not, you know, as Chief Curtis started alluding to, you know, the process where you do this, and then you get the petition, you do this. Most people probably would have no clue how to navigate that. If we can streamline something and start something, we can begin to make a much more equitable approach to this without undoing everything that has been done, where we know that, you know, around schools and other things, we need those safety buffers. We need to have those considerations. So we know that there is not a perfect solution here tonight. And I appreciate that, but please, let's start to do something different, because the approach we have taken has not worked. It pushes it off to other groups. It, you know, there will always be challenges. We recognize that, but we need to start at least coming up with a more consistent approach to this, so that residents and everybody else can, you know, understand the process much better and get action taken much easier than what we have witnessed thus far. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jackie Freeman.
Jackie Freeman, I live at 105 Mason, next to the mayor, and I have not spoken to her.
Will you pull the microphone down though, so everyone can hear what you have to say? There you go.
I have not spoken on purpose about this to my neighbor. But I'm going to take my old card, and I've been here for 42 years in this neighborhood, and I have been here when we didn't have restrictions on Mason, and it was bad. There was a lot of safety things. And now we have even more lawn people with the big tractors that take up 3 parking spaces. I don't know where they're going. On that corner, I worry about the active shooter possibly that the schools are doing drills and things for, but they don't seem to know that the emergency vehicles will have a real jam with 3 schools right there. There is an environmental club at the high school that was organized a few years ago that is trying to do something as far as carpooling and preaching that to their students. So I think the students themselves are taking a little initiative there. And I think this high school is not putting into their plans when they spend their money for all the things they do. I think that something should be allocated to making more parking. And I think it's a responsibility mostly of the school board.
Right. Thank you very much. Next, we have Steve Ruzicki.
I'm Steve Brzezicki, 239 East Swan. Many years ago, Webster Groves began its restrictions on parking to keep Webster Groves high school students from parking in certain areas during the school days. A flood wall of sorts was begun. In 2002, that flood wall was lengthened by adding further streets to the barrier, leaving my block and others to absorb the deluge 174 days a year. I came and spoke at this dais on July 9th, 2002, pleading with you to stop. Since then, I've addressed city officials time after time as parking restrictions, effectively banning students on certain blocks were implemented, thus raising the tide on my own block and others further from the high school. Mayor Arnold, perhaps you recall your own admission in 2018 of your sensitivity to the topic, your own residents and your own words on a protected street. This is a complicated issue. Previous city managers and mayor have sidestepped the topic, but your willingness to judge issues and make decisions based on fairness and equity is to be commended, and I'm thankful for you. I ask you tonight to take time for your deliberation and to believe that every hill to climb to make things right, fair, and equitable is surmountable. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Next, we have John Reeve.
My name is John Reeve. I'm at 48 Mason. And I think it's instructive that the school district is not represented by this process. Mason Avenue and Joy and a few other streets had restricted parking put in place about 20 years ago. We were there before that, so we've been on Mason for 27 years, so we predate that restriction. And I agree that the streets before they were restricted were very, very problematic in terms of safety, in terms of just the quality of the neighborhood. And I think it's important to realize that other similar communities, I would say peer communities like Kirkwood, like Clayton, U City, other communities around here deal with this issue to keep students from parking in their adjacent neighborhoods. They provide for the parking on site or in some other way. So I asked the council to consider whether you want Webster Groves to be the outlier by pushing parking for the high schoolers into these neighborhoods. And we've enjoyed the fact that they're not on Mason and Joy now. And we're very sympathetic to East Swan and other places where the students have been pushed to. But the problem is that the school district needs to accept their responsibility. This problem has been going on for decades. And they have not, they weren't in this process. And I think the idea that a commission with a portfolio of traffic is somehow the appropriate venue for solving such a complicated issue is frankly a little bit like strange. Why wouldn't the school district step up? The other thing I would say is according to their published budgets, they had over the last 3 years, $30 million of capital that they put into things. So the number maybe hasn't been clear. And there are other ways to solve this problem beyond putting the burden onto the surrounding neighborhoods. These neighborhoods are all wonderful neighborhoods, but they're not wonderful when the student parking takes over those neighborhoods. So with that, I guess I agree with the other safety issues that have been discussed. And I appreciate that the council can perhaps put some political pressure onto the school district in a concerted way, even if it involves things like organizing neighborhoods, not just Joy and Mason, but the broader neighborhood that's surrounding the high school, to really pull that group together to do a set of efforts that are literally putting political pressure onto the high school. High school has to take care of this.
Thank you. Next, we have Matt Crane.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Matt Crane. I live at 200 block of East Swan. And I think what's clear tonight is everybody here is in agreement that, you know, having cars line both sides of the streets is an awful situation, creates safety issues, it creates access issues, it can create trash issues and other situations that we don't like on our streets. As I see it, the question here really reduces to whether the council is going to implement a process or continue in an ad hoc fashion as it has, which has caused this problem to exacerbate apparently substantially since the 40s or whenever this was enacted. So where I live in the middle of the block, my biggest concern with respect to the high school parking is that the fire truck or the ambulance is not going to be able to make it up to my house to get my kids. And so with respect to the timing of an implementation, with respect to opening the dialogue further to allow people that haven't been raising this issue to the council for a long time, with respect to some of these other issues, these are all process-oriented issues that can be sorted out. It's nothing, Councilor Bruntrager can't solve. As I see it, nobody is saying that there shouldn't be a system here. The main concern is whether streets that currently face this situation are going to continue to live with this situation where there's risk, access, reliability issues, or if streets that had, proactively gotten ahead of the situation, recognize congestion issues that they really didn't like decades ago are going to be forced back into that. Nobody wants it, whether it's in the future or right now. But all that really needs to be decided is whether the city is going to adopt a system that's comprehensive, that's intelligent, that's thought out. And if there's a couple wrinkles that need to be ironed out along the ways, we've got the counselor, we've got other people that I'm sure could lend some creative support and ideas. But at the end of the day, even if this were implemented January 1, nothing happens until a street proactively and affirmatively opts in, as I understand the mechanics of this. And so this isn't something that is going to, shake the city on January 1 if it's implemented then or whenever the date might be. Something that's going to take time. And realistically, the people that are going to care the most, that are going to be most vocal about this are the people that are here today. The people, in Webster Park who stand to lose the protections and the feeling of safety that they currently enjoy. And the people like my neighbors on Swan who don't have those. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Jennifer Boutte. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the chance to speak. I live at 130 Plant Avenue, and I am a pretty new resident of the city. We've been here about 2.5 years in our home, and I am unique in that our home backs from Plant up to Carouche Place. So we are the known thoroughfare from Plant to the high school. And I'm pretty sure it's been that way for probably 100 years from what my neighbors tell me. And we want to be good neighbors. And the students who have parked on Plant and walked through our yard are all very polite. They'll say hello. They'll stop and have a conversation with me. And we want to be good neighbors, and we don't necessarily want that to stop. But our street, Plant, is only 22 feet. We did measure it the other day. And so if you look when people line both sides of the street, it is almost impossible to get my minivan through those two sides of the parked cars. We have had one of our cars sideswiped. We have seen other students' cars lose their rearview mirrors, and safety is our biggest concern. We want to make sure that those fire engines, ambulances could get through that street if the need ever did arise. Again, we do want to be good neighbors. We want the students to be able to get to their team practices and whatnot, as long as they are being good neighbors as well. An interesting thing that we have noticed, and I'm assuming it's because of the businesses on Lockwood, but the north part of Plant Avenue is restricted parking to one side of the street only. So we would think that that could be an option of just continuing that further down the street for that. I know a couple of my neighbors that I have talked to would be very supportive of that as well. One thought I had listening to some of the suggestions tonight is nobody has brought up the idea of student permit parking for our streets. It would generate a little revenue, and it would possibly hold students accountable for their behavior and help us keep the streets a little safer there as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Marshall Burton. Mr. Burton.
Evening. I'm Marshall Burton. I live at 40 Mason. My main concern is safety. I live 2 houses from the grade school and observe every day the drop off and pickup. And a number of times I'm coming home at the same time. I think it's a very hazardous situation. I can't envision taking that envelope of activity and stretching it the entire block with more cars driven by high school students and kids walking down the street, both grade school and high school, looking at their phones. It looks like an accident waiting to happen. Second point I'd like to make is I agree with the comments made by the chief. One is equity. This isn't a citywide, there are multiple pockets of this problem, but it's not citywide. On Mason, I feel like we're right in the target of what's going to happen. Oakwood is at the end of Mason, 200 feet further than my house, and there are no restrictions there, and there's not a whole lot of parking there. It's not a problem there. So it seems that like the issue is that it's so immediate, so close that the students aren't going to walk another 200 feet, in my opinion, to find parking. So it's going to go right to our streets, very focused. And the third point is that I think the high school does need to take some responsibility. Most institutions, I know that it was said that they're a public institution and it would take a vote to spend money, I guess, and that somehow they're exempt from the requirements of other institutions, be they private high schools or apartment complexes or banks. They always have to account for their parking issues. I went to Holy Redeemer Grade School graduated in 1956. And to my memory, the high school has roughly the same parking capacity as they did 65 years ago. I think that the times have changed. They need to change with them. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Nathan Hardage.
Good evening, Mayor, council
Good
members. Nathan Hardage, 236 East Swan. I am one of many neighbors here tonight who have been dealing with a traffic nightmare for the last 2.5 years since we've lived there. Now I know why the selling realtor only had us come over after 4 p.m. to look at the house. I should have been smarter looking back. I wasn't. But I think there's been a lot of great points brought up tonight. More than anything, I'm excited that this parking situation is at the forefront now, and appreciate the Traffic Advisory Commission for all the work they've done to try to put something together, at least to build some sort of foundation that we can step forward from. I don't know if that answers all the questions that need to be addressed as far as how we fix this problem, but it's a starting point, and I certainly hope that we take it and move forward with it. I certainly don't want, our neighboring streets who have had the restrictions and have not had to deal with some of the parking issues that we have had to deal with, such as yourself, Mayor, to all of a sudden have to handle all the burden of the the high school parking. I have a son that goes to Holy Redeemer. I appreciate the safe environment of walking down the sidewalk to drop him off in the mornings and pick him up in the afternoons. I don't want that to go away either. What I do want is for this to be a starting point for a solution to this problem that we've been dealing with. I will say that the 200 block of East Swan today is a liability for the city of Webster Groves. For, as my neighbor Matt Crane mentioned earlier, if something were to happen, if there was a fire during the school hours on that block, if there was an emergency that an ambulance needed to get to one of our houses today, it would not be able to address whatever emergency was going on. And that is unacceptable. I don't want to wait until this solution is solved from a grant perspective. I want our block fixed immediately. I want something addressed as soon as possible. So when we start 2024 off for the second semester of the school year, that at least one side of the street is restricted from any parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie Hasselmeyer.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hasselmeyer, 215 East Swan. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to just voice my concerns. My letter to you is in your packet, so I won't bore you by reading that aloud, but I do want to underscore how important it is that we address the safety of the parking situation on Swan. It really does concern me for my friends and neighbors. I also want to thank the Traffic Advisory Commission for the time that they put into addressing this. They've done a really thorough job, and I think it's really important that we are starting this this conversation is here with us now, and ready to support some sort of changes so that all of our neighborhood can shoulder the responsibility of our high school students. Right now, I realize there's not a ton of parking for them. And that's why they're on both sides of Swan. But I also really think it's important that we partner with the school district and partner with the students who have all been super respectful in my experience. And so I just hope that you will consider supporting the policies, if not the first iteration, maybe the second upon review that the Traffic Advisory Commission put forth. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Doug Stanley.
My name's Doug Stanley. I live at 25 Mason, and my wife spoke earlier today. We were new to Mason Avenue and realized that we had nowhere to park, and there was extreme congestion in our section. And what we were finding is that the students, because you can see the high school from our house, the students were coming to their cars during the lunch hour. And so we tried to alleviate that problem by going to the high school and talking to them about it, which is what troubles me tonight. Where is the high school? Where are they? I mean, this is an issue for them. But anyway, we suggested that that they close the campus so that at least, they wouldn't be throwing their litter and coming to our yards and stuff. And they said, well, that's punitive. What we think you should do is maybe take a look at what your other streets are doing. So they actually encouraged us to go to the police department and go through the process of getting a restriction. The second thing I wanted to say is, and it's been 20 years now, and it's worked, I think, okay. I mean, I feel for those on Swan, but I think there may be a solution for them. The question about it not being fair or equitable, I appreciate Police Chief Curtis's observation that it would not be fair or equitable for us and for the 9 houses. The majority of the houses on Mason Avenue have turned since we've had this ordinance. And how fair is it to them when they suddenly don't have a place to park in front of their house, 3 of which are right across the street from Holy Redeemer. And that gets to me to the point of Holy Redeemer. It's extremely congested. If you guys have gone through that process, it's so congested coming in and out. And there's barely enough room to pass during that period of time. It's the same period of time that the high school is starting and stopping too, generally. And so by doing that, you're just going to add to the problem. Mr. Burton, our neighbor, said it perfectly. It's already bad now. I mean, if you can imagine having students parking there from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. all day long, not only are you going to have problems with parking yourself, but also the issue with the safety of the students coming and going from Holy Redeemer. It would be a nightmare, an absolute nightmare.
Time.
Oh my goodness, I have more to say. All right.
Just so you know, your written communication has gone to all council members.
Okay,
so
great. Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, believe it or not, we're going to change topics. Mr. Tim Quinn.
Good evening.
Mayor, my name is Shay Hicks. I'm a lawyer with the law firm of Bryan Cave. I'm here with Mr. Quinn this evening. What we came to ask is that the council respectively reconsider the decision they made last week to effectively close the door on the recovery of funds for those victims of the flood in 2022. As you probably know, there's 4 homeowners that were affected by this flood that basically had significant damage to their homes. They received notices that they were to either raise their home up a number of different feet, move their home, or the ultimate tear it down. And the position they were put in is in effect, a constructive condemnation of the property. And the federal government through FEMA and SEMA has come in and they've agreed to help cover the expense of basically buying these homeowners out of their homes, and have agreed to cover 75% of that cost. The city was asked to cover 25%, and by effect, the decision last week and deciding not to cover that 25% prevents Mr. Quinn and others similarly situated from receiving any of the 75% that was earmarked by those government agencies. It seems like a harsh result. So I want to tell you a little bit about Mr. Quinn. He moved to Webster Grove in 2017 because he viewed Webster Groves as a very attractive city and area. He was a young single father with a young child. He was in his 30s at the time. He's later grown his family, so he moved out of that residence, the one at 838 Pacific, and rented that property and bought a second home in Webster Groves. So not only has he made the one investment in Webster Groves, he's a homeowner a second time and has paid taxes on both of those properties. He's a resident that's in need of help. He's looking for assistance. There have been some recoveries that have been made possible through insurance. He's still at a significant loss on the value of his property and is hoping that Webster Groves does the right thing and helps him out and doesn't stand in the way of him recovering the money that was earmarked from the other federal and agencies. Obviously, this is a topic that could go on for a long time, and we're welcome to continue this either, this evening or at a later time, but we just hope that you would give us more consideration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Quinn, you have 3 minutes as well if you'd like to add anything.
I think what I heard from this group that I didn't comment on because the comment section is before the discussion section, is that, I knew I was buying a property in the flood zone, and I get what I deserve here, but I knew a little bit about flood and not everything. I thought the process would be I buy insurance. If it floods, the insurance pays me the money and then I fix the house. But in this case, I'm not allowed to fix the house because Webster won't allow me to fix it. So it's collect some insurance, then pay to demolish your house, and then you have a piece of land in a flood zone that I could potentially build something 10 feet in the air on stilts. It's an impossible situation that you never would think about, even if you know you're buying in a flood zone. So
the house was also built in 19.
So the way public comments go, this is his time. You've had your time.
I yield my time. That's okay.
whatever's remaining. So go ahead.
Pardon me. We need another speaker card filled out because there was
He's,
only.
no,
one.
there are two.
There
There
are
are two.
two.
Yeah, there are
So you
two.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can yield the remainder of your time, certainly.
Just to point out, the home was built in 1954. There's been no prior situations to give him notice that this would ever happen. It's through no fault of his own. It's a natural disaster that was caused by an unprecedented flood. He's obviously in need of help, and he asked that, the city of Webster Groves, give him the security and the support that he thought he was buying into when he bought this home, and secondly, the second home in Webster Grove. So it's a desirable place to live. I would ask that you not start the precedent of shutting the door on your residents that are in trouble, in need of help, and are obviously taxpayers and community contributors as well. With that, thank you.
Thank you. Bridget Moran.
Bridget Moran at 1051 Coolman Lane. And I also am a flood victim. And I have to say that I just can't believe that you made us wait 16 months to turn us down on a reason that is the reason you went for this. You went for FEMA. And what FEMA is for people who bought in flood zones. So I just really don't understand. And I did not attend the meeting. You're right, but I was watching it. And I did watch the meeting, and I could tell that none of you had done any research. You had done nothing to look up what the consequences were. What was FEMA going to do? What was, was FEMA, could you split it with FEMA? Could you do this? Could you do that? Nobody looked into anything. But yet we've been 16 months without knowing what we were going to do when you knew exactly what you were filing for, what you were applying for. And yet 16 months later, you just changed your mind for the exact reason I don't understand any of it. I really don't get it. I don't understand how you could do this to your residents. And I did buy in a flood zone. You're right. And I knew I was buying in a flood zone. I bought a house from family. Yes, I did. I did. But I bought a house that only flooded once and never got to the living space. It flooded once in 2008 in 70 years. One time, I knew the history. One time, and everybody else's place flooded that year too. So yes, I did. I made that choice. But to victim shame me is wrong, very wrong. I just can't believe that somebody would do that in the newspaper and shame these people like that for buying in a flood zone. That was our choice. Didn't quite work out for us. That's like telling these people they bought on a street that parking is bad. That's their choice, It's we're people that live in Webster Groves. We deserve more. That's all, And I would like to know, I've been trying to call Webster, but nobody seems to want to help us now. In any case, to see what the appeal process is, to know what the date is of the appeal process. I don't get an answer, I called the city manager's office. Nobody wants to call back. Nobody wants to let me know. You put a note on my door, to whom it may concern. That's how they let us know. To whom it may concern, pretty much tear your house down, time to go. That's Webster Groves. That's how much they care about their residents.
All right, thank you. Clark Hoteling.
Good evening. I'm changing gears a little bit. I
have followed and really appreciate the work that you all have done on the strategic planning. And I haven't really paid attention to the process, how you're going to tweak it or update it or review the strategic plan. So assuming there's a process, I have two things that I thought were missing that I wanted to share with you. So if there is a time to review and tweak and add, you might consider adding these into your strategic plan. The first is a long-term plan with specific actions to move us towards a community that is more diverse. Specific plan, both in terms of our residents and our businesses. Recently, I went to a presentation addressing the root causes of health and wealth disparities in St. Louis, presented by Dr. Will Ross. He ended his presentation with a path forward to erasing the gaps, a 25-year Marshall Plan for St. Louis City and St. Louis County. He had 6 specific actions outlining the hard work that has to be done if we truly want to remove those gaps. If we want to say it in our aspirations, that's probably not going to happen. So specific actions. I was so impressed with his presentation. Secondly, in a recent community survey, and I think it was the Balancing Act last year, the residents clearly stated they wanted Webster to be more of a walkable community. Along those lines, I'd really like the city to adopt a complete streets policy. And I know we're moving towards that. It's long overdue. I didn't see anything in the current strategic plan that addressed that. I was a little disappointed because the residents really spoke to that. And I didn't see that. I think it would fit really nicely within the purposeful land use that you talked about and also sustainability. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Dave Buck.
Dave Buck, 124 South Elm. My remarks tonight are on something very different, particularly given that Thanksgiving is Thursday. It's on the universal emotional feeling of happiness. My primary expert source is my deceased friend, world scholar, and Harvard University professor of psychology, Jerome Kagan. How we think and feel about issues are both essential, but more often than not, it is our emotional feelings that outweigh our rational thoughts in guiding our decisions and actions. And I think you're seeing some of that tonight. There are 4 primary emotions in life: happy, sad, mad, scared, from which all other emotions are derived. It's healthy to feel and flow from all 4 of those emotions. But if your dominant emotion is not happy, you are in dysfunction, and the goal is to get back to happy, because happiness is the pathway to peace. The Declaration of Independence even identifies one of our unalienable rights as the pursuit of happiness. And this year, 2023, Harvard University, led in large part by Dr. Kagan, completed the longest market research study ever conducted on any subject, 85 years, to determine what factors most contribute to creating happiness in life. The number 1 factor, above all others, good relationships, not driven by technology, but good human face-to-face relationships. However, like Clark was talking about the strategic plan, neither happiness or good relationships appear anywhere in your strategic plan. As such, I wonder just how happy we residents truly are, how good your relationship is with us, and what both sides can do to improve it. One way to find out is conduct a new community survey, which you conduct a lot of. Ask some very simple fundamental questions like, how do you feel about living in Webster Groves? How happy are you living in Webster Groves? And how do you rate the quality of the city's relationship with you? As for me, I make no bones about it. I love Webster Groves. I've lived here 23 years. For whatever reasons, Webster fits me like a glove. As such, I feel very happy and thankful for the privilege of being part of this great community. And I remain hopeful and steadfast that building good relationships between people will end the hate, the fear, and the sadness that pervades us today, and will finally restore happiness and peace in the world, our nation, and yes, right here in our little hamlet of Webster Groves. Thank you.
Thank you.
3 minutes, Katie. That was good.
Pretty good, Dave.
All right, for those of you who are on Zoom, if you have a public comment, you could use the raise your hand function at this time and we'll call on you. Give you just a minute here. All right, I see no hands. Do you agree with that, folks over here? All right, I would like to take a moment and thank all of you on all topics who made public comments today. You are welcome to stay for the remainder of our meeting. We have some more business to attend to, but if we're going to pause for just 15 seconds, if anyone has other pressing things they need to do tonight, to please, feel free to go ahead and go. Like some help. Like, I'm just gonna set this right up here. Yeah, I would though when the time comes. Yeah, how about if that for now? All right, we will go ahead and continue now.
I know.
Do we have any new business from the council or city manager or city attorney or anyone? All right, folks, we're back in session. All right, no, then we'll move to unfinished business. Councilmember Hickson Shepherd, could you call for the third reading of Bill number 9237?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the third reading of Bill number 9237.
Second.
Bill 9237, third reading, an ordinance designating and establishing the structure located at 15 Marvin Court as a city designated historic landmark in the city and matters related thereto.
All right, do we have questions or comments?
Just one comment. I'm glad we move in this direction to make 15 Marvin Court a historical landmark in Webster Groves.
I agree.
We got a lot of head nodding going
It's an incredible discovery and it's exciting as well.
All right, I think we can have the vote then.
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Bliss?
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander?
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson?
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd?
Yes.
Mayor Arnold?
Yes, and we do have two things here. If Ms. Jones would like to come forward. Council, you can come on down. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, snap a bunch of hands.
I wasn't worried about that.
Historic home owned by Melvin and Tyra Bonds, Benny Ward subdivision 1956. Just another little thing from the city, in terms of helping us discover something about ourselves as a community that we didn't know. You deserve something more, and I want to give credit to the city manager and Mr. Starkey, who's our director, engagement to put this all together. So you can, come on, everybody come in. Yeah, Dave, you want to start something? Would you like the bubble wrap to get that home?
Ceremonial bubble wrap.
So there's no accident on the way. Thank you. All right, Councilwoman Alexander, could you call for the third reading of Bill number 9238, please?
Yes, Mayor, I would like to call for the third and final reading of Bill number 9238 and its subsequent adoption.
Second.
I'll
Is-
read it, but this is not nearly as much fun as the one before it was. Bill 9238, third reading. An ordinance authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission Surface Transportation Block Grant, the STBG, program agreement for the design and construction of resurfacing, construct shared use path and curb and gutter, Elm Avenue from Glendale Road to Watson Road, federal project number STBG 5577-640.
All right, is there any further discussion?
It's not as exciting, but it's still exciting.
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting. All right, let's have the vote then, please.
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Franklin? Councilmember Franklin?
Yeah, I said he was.
was talking.
Yes.
Yes. Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander?
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson?
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd?
Yes.
Mayor Arnold?
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss?
Yes.
All right, we'll move on to new business. Our first item of new business is the Charter Review Advisory Board recommendations. You have this new bound copy with all the appendices, so for easy reference, thank you very much to staff for providing that for us. We have two items to discuss from the recommendations that are on our schedule. I'm going to go out of order, I think, from the agenda. The first item is that we probably could take a little bit less time on. Maybe that's dooming us, so forgive me for saying that. If you go to page 30 of the document you have, it's the municipal judge. And so currently, the charter requires the municipal judge to be a resident and elector of the city of Webster Groves. The CRAB recommendation would be to remove the residency requirement. So it would just strike out a resident and elector of the city, which would be consistent with our city manager position. And that would leave the only position that was a residency requirement was that of the city manager. And so our decision point, again, is true the last time, would we like to instruct the city attorney to put together ballot language to be sent for us to decide whether it gets sent to the voters?
I'm in favor.
So I would entertain a motion to that effect.
I'd like to make a motion.
Brand new.
I did. Make a motion that the city attorney draft language to remove the residency requirement of the municipal judge.
Second.
All right. Do we need we can just say yay, right?
Yeah, you
If-
can see.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so
Uh,
that,
I,
we got you. We
Can
got
I-
you there, Mr. Franklin. Sorry, did that mess up your
quick, so
whole
it's on
system?
the record.
Okay.
I think, we elect our judges and we appoint our judges based off of where they live at a state level, at a national level, dictating their
Well
the
said.
local level. I think of all places, I think it's extremely important that that judge knows and understands where, what he or she, the community that they are adjudicating. So I think this is actually a really important thing that they live within the community.
So were you a nay then on sending this to the voters? The removal?
I don't want to remove the residency requirement. I think it's really important that they do live in Webster Groves.
Okay.
So we would
What
count
about
it as
the,
a nay.
yeah.
Yeah, so we'll record one nay then on the vote there. All right, thank you. We will then move on to the second point of discussion was the system of representation, which you can find the beginning of the discussion in your report on page 7. So as you all know, currently, all those on council are elected at the at-large system. The Charter Review Advisory Board has recommended we move to a hybrid system which means a portion of council would be elected by a district or ward-based system, and a portion would be elected at large. They have not defined anything about what that might look like or what the transition to that system would look like. And the reason, and I think it's clear in the report, the reason they didn't define that is because they couldn't agree. So our question here is, I think rather than do we send something to the voters or not, we don't really have anything to send to the voters. This is too broad a question. So the question that we have before us today is, would we as a council like to appoint some group, task force, working group made up maybe of some Charter Review Advisory Board members, maybe some of the council, we can recruit some other members from the community if you all would like, to put together a proposal that would be specific enough for us to consider as something that might be sent to the voters. The caveat I have about this is going to take months, and this is going to require a huge commitment on the part of whoever takes part in this. And so I don't want us to be in a position where we say, oh, please go figure this all out, and then we decide not to send it to the ballot anyway.
Yeah,
So-
I wanted to, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first this time.
Okay.
So if I remember correctly, the Charter Advisory Commission, it was like a 5-4.
Yes.
In favor of the hybrid.
Correct.
So how would that question look on the ballot?
Well, that is the question.
Yeah, should the city of Webster Groves go to at large or hybrid?
No, I think you're going to have to give them a specific, because ultimately there's somewhere, whether it's in the ordinance or actually in the ballot language, you're going to have to define what it is what you're asking them to vote on. So you're going to have to say, with the boundaries that would include, here is Ward 1, here is Ward 2, here's the at-large, and here's how they're going to be staggered. I think all of that would have to be in the question.
And that's
Because-
the purpose of having a subcommittee, correct? Is to kind of help
Yes.
hone that down.
Yeah, but then we have to, as a council, decide we want to go in this direction
Of course you do.
of a hybrid.
Right.
Because
Council, we're just deciding that we want to put it to the voters for them to decide, right? I mean, we're not deciding which direction we want to go in. We're deciding if we want to get more information and put it
Yes.
in a format that we can present it to the voters. Is that
but
right?
based on what Neil just said, that we have to say this is Ward 1, Ward 2.
This, you'd have to come up with a recommendation that would be clear, a question that would clearly place to the voters what it is you're recommending be done.
Yeah, so I think what complicates this one compared to some of the other things we're doing is the level of detail in what we were proposing as an alternative is something that we don't have to consider in any of the other things that we're talking about right now.
That's right.
Which is why I just want to make sure that if we're going to go down this road, that there are enough of us wanting to send something like it to the ballot before we go down that road.
I find it difficult to get this done before April.
Well, we're not going to, there's no, I mean, I think an easy, I think if we were going to estimate, given sort of the way the Charter Review Advisory Board worked on things, we're talking 6 months at least before they have anything even to bring back to council.
Right, and then there are organizations out there that could assist us in breaking down into wards and making sure they're equitable all the way around. I mean, I don't think it's something that we can do.
But we have to set up the process by which that is done. So for example, most of the communities in which you draw wards, you have that done either by the legislative body or you have it done by a citizen commission that is appointed by the legislative body. That citizen commission then could go ahead and take some professional advice on how you do it. But our job is to define that process in a way that is clear to voters and clear then to people who come after us about how this is going to be implemented.
I am opposed to moving forward with the research even because I don't think we have enough consensus or impetus from the public to take on this massive project. I think defining it is a project in itself, implementing it is a project in itself, but that to me, doesn't necessarily even end you with a result that is beneficial to everybody. And I think if we were in a position today where we were hearing a lot of public outcry about at-large representation, we might have a different conversation. I don't hear that as a regular topic of concern from residents in our current council. I don't think we should put this away forever and never pick it up again. I think if, in the future that should be something that's still out there to be discussed, but it doesn't feel like this is the time to take on this huge undertaking, which in a way that feels a little bit arbitrary, because it feels to me like more that people don't want to commit to at-large awards. And so the easier answer then is hybrid, but that's actually the hardest answer. Like, I think I think I would honestly prefer we do one or the other, like either keep it how it is or go to awards, because I think if the more complicated this gets, the harder it is for voters to understand what's happening. The harder it is for people to decide if they want to run to represent something or other. And I realize I'm straight off topic, but I think to my mind, this isn't the time to take this on, and it's too much. We're asking for too much investment from the public, from staff, frankly, from the city, at a time that it's not a huge need.
So based on the commission's recommendation, they said hybrid, but the council can make a decision to go in a different direction. Is that correct?
That is.
So if hybrid is going to be difficult, maybe we just go straight to ward.
That's
So
also
they discussed
difficult.
that also.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna have to be difficult with something, either the hybrid or the ward.
Or
Or
it
it doesn't have to
the way it
change.
is.
No,
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing is to not change it, right?
right, that's
So-
the easiest thing, and that's not the most, for me, it's not the most courageous thing.
I don't know that that it's not the most courageous thing, but I feel like there's were you done?
No, I'm
Sorry.
done.
So it's a huge burden, right? It's a huge amount of work that would need to be done. And, looking at the list of other municipalities, looking at the research and what they brought in, I mean, I feel like internally I'm split 5-4, like, but I'm more the other way. I mean, I'm with Sarah, not the way that the crowd voted is. I don't think it's the time. I think we'd overcomplicate it. It's not just setting it up, it's maintenance, like, every 10 years with the census, are we doing it again? And then who's deciding? And I feel like if we thought we were going to get a better outcome of elections and more representation of the city, that maybe that would sway me a little bit, but that's not, to my understanding, what the research bears out. And so I would not be for at this time moving forward with more research on this either.
You can make that a third. I agree with everything that Sarah and Emily has said thus far.
Well, I think we need to make a decision, because to kick the can down the road, when will you pick up that can again?
I mean, I'm happy to make a decision that we don't do it. So that's.
I mean, that's fine, but I'm just saying, I think we should do it. We should do something. That's why the commission we asked the voters, should we do the charter? And they said yes. And this is an important piece of the charter. If we're going to go to wards or hybrid, and or says we are. But I think everybody agreed with, the statements I made earlier today. How will you ever achieve equal representation in Webster?
I don't think
So
that's
equal
good.
representation in what sense? What's unequal right now?
Well, there's always, I think there's a map in here somewhere that shows, it appears that all of the councilmen is always in one geographical area.
Actually, if you look at the map,
That
there,
goes back quite a ways.
It doesn't go back that
It's on
far,
page
and I
9.
think part of the issue is like the date range is kind of arbitrary.
the date range is, part of it is also just available data, right? And so, but, I will say when this first came up as a topic of conversation, at least to my knowledge, there was a concentration of council members in a particular area. That is not the same as it was, and it wasn't prior to that era either. And so, I think we have to be careful to think about one snapshot in time as being fully representative of what's equal. And I will tell you, one of the reasons that most people, sorry, back up, many communities go to an award system from an at-large system because they have racial issues of racial underrepresentation. We run the risk of going in the other direction of diminishing the diversity of our council based on race, if we're gonna institute a certain number of wards.
And then you look at the work done by the commission, you only have one city, and that's Kirkwood, that's still at large. And some city in Westwood, Kansas. Everybody else is at pure ward or there's one hybrid.
There's one hybrid, which is Kansas City. And that's the other thing. I
In
feel
Kansas
like
City.
Kansas City is pretty large and
And they're, and
500,000 people as compared to 25 or 29,
Yeah.
I mean, when we look at the ones, I mean, so we only have Kirkwood, but Kirkwood is most similar in terms of population. When we look at some of these other ones, the population is less, number one. Number two, my concern is if the objective here is to try to obtain diversity, I think it would do the opposite. And the other question, I know one of the things that Sarah raised was, there has not been enough interest or concern articulated by the population, by the residents, so the question becomes, well, do you start with some type of a poll or like balancing act, or I'm not balancing act, but to get if there's a feel for the residents for wanting to change wards. I know we've heard it, but how much of the population really wants to see that, number one, and then I'm just concerned that when you start having isolated representation as opposed to at large where everybody's responsible for everybody.
and just so you know, the CREB did a survey, and there's no consensus in the public about this either, because it's 31% said, let's go to wards, 22% said, let's have a hybrid. And so the remaining, 47% said, let's keep it the way it is.
Yeah.
So we don't have a strong community census, I don't think, in any direction.
I'm sorry, I missed that part. How many people that
It was
population
not a huge sample. I want to say it was like 400. Do you remember at all?
It was, I think like 383, something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth noting that, you mentioned that, that there was a time when it did seem like all the representation was really in that one area, but the voters corrected that because, they noticed it too. So I do feel like there's a little bit of like, that if that's the way that it works out, because the voters of Webster Groves decide that I don't want the power to be all sort of concentrated in this one neighborhood, I'm going to make it an intentional choice. I think there's something to be said for that too. You're giving that choice back to the voters instead of kind of drawing those lines for them. So maybe it writes itself, in this community. And right now that seems like that's what happened.
Pam, do you want to have a
I've
chance
just
to?
been listening and, I'm like an investigator, so I would definitely want to participate in a subcommittee if we were to have one. But I'm looking at the viewpoints in favor of a hybrid system, and some of them are just, some of them are human behavior, like increased representation and feeling of legitimacy people feel towards their elected officials. I think that's on us to do that. That's our responsibility. Lower the barriers to entry for candidates for city council by allowing for campaigning in smaller geographic areas. I think there are other barriers aside from the size of the geographic area, which has to do with money and time, money campaigning, money that you earn from being a council member. So I feel like some of these things are not policy driven. They're kind of a little bit more behavior. And I do think as a council, we have worked, and I think the community has worked hard to get a variety of viewpoints and demographics on council.
I will just add one more thing. I think I told you all that I've been having meetings with those former council members who wanted to talk about these charter review advisory board changes. All four that I've met with so far have suggested that the status quo is probably better than a change. So I think what we need right now, if someone would like to move this forward to drafting language, we'd need a motion and then a vote on the motion, I believe.
Do what?
I think to investigate. I think at this point, it would be to put together a bot. If you want to move forward, the next step would be to put together a group of people to come up with a specific recommendation for the council to send potentially to voters. And the city attorney is nodding at me, so I think I said that correctly.
Yes.
Yeah. So question, will this committee have resources?
I guess only if we give them some.
Yeah, I mean, just because I don't want to use, you have a map, so who's gonna draw this map? And I'm just going back to, when we redrew the school district boundary.
And again, this
wait,
group is
wait.
not drawing the map. We're
No.
defining the group.
Yes, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, so just defining if it's gonna be a hybrid or at large or wards. Those are three decisions?
I think because the Charter Review Advisory Board made the recommendation that it be a hybrid system, that would be what we would be asking this group to do unless council decided right here and now they wanted to disregard that recommendation and make a recommendation to look into something else. But what I would like, right now, I sense, if I'm counting correctly, that there may not be enough people to move away from the status quo of at large anyway.
Well, I make a motion that we create a committee is appointed to review the recommendation of the Charter Review Commission to look at the hybrid system for Webster Groves.
Okay. Do I have a second?
So if there's no second, it fails for want of a second.
Correct.
It's as though it's,
I was just waiting for a minute to make sure everyone could make their full decision.
you looked here, I thought it was a question.
Yeah, sorry. No, I did look there. Probably thinking, how long should I wait?
Ding.
All right, so what this means is, in my interpretation, we will let the city council, city attorney correct me if I'm wrong. What this means is this council has decided not to send this recommendation forward to the voters. However, any subsequent council at any time who wants to revisit this can revisit this, including with the information collected by the Charter Review Advisory Board.
That is correct.
But don't fool this stuff. It's not gonna be.
Oh, yeah,
May I
that's
make
okay.
another comment? Just
Please.
kind of like along my rationale, I do think with all the other exciting initiatives and ways to move forward, I think it would be better use of our energy to look at the strategic plan. We've got a comprehensive plan we want to talk about. There's been a talk about an economic development plan. So I think there's a lot of other positive things and ways to move forward that would be a good use of each of our time.
All right, thank you. All right, Councilmember Bliss, would you like to call for the first and second reading of Bill number 9240?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the first and second reading of Bill number 9240.
Second.
Bill 9240, first reading. An ordinance calling a general obligation bond election in the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, for the purpose of funding various park and recreational improvements in the city and authorizing certain actions in connection therewith.
Madam City Manager, do you have any comments you'd like to make at this point in time?
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So at each of your seats, you have this spreadsheet. This shows the results from the prioritized survey that council requested to do. Mr. Peterson put it together. He also put a comparison for what the community's results on the survey, so you can see them side by side. That, Madam Mayor's really, this time was for council to have discussion if there were any other questions, if you had questions about the weighted ranking, unweighted ranking, or a conversation amongst yourselves in terms of what priorities were.
Right.
And just as a reminder, the specifics, we're a long way from specifics of any of these. This is really a discussion about topics that you all are interested in, excuse me, not topics, but projects that you all are interested in. Once staff has that direction, then we can dig in to those specific things, size, location, cost, all of those sorts of things. Is that helpful, or did I muddy the water more?
No, I think that's fine. So just as a reminder, our job tonight is to move forward Bill 9240 so that we can put the funding initiative on the ballot. We do not have to define anything about any of these projects this evening. And in fact, during the course of this spring, we'll do some defining for the public what these are, but remember, this is going to be somewhat flexible given what things cost and what we learn about what they cost and when we learn those things. Does anyone have anything in particular they want to talk about, or should we move on to the second reading?
Just thank you for doing this. It's helpful. I'm glad we went through the exercise together again.
I'm curious about what the others were, your investment ideas, but
Yeah.
I don't believe.
Oh,
I don't think anybody answered it.
There were some a couple of ideas, I'm sorry. Looks like there really was not much on the other investment ideas, which I took as a good sign, not that people didn't participate in it, but we've had several discussions now, as well as small group discussions, some one-on-one discussions. So hopefully everybody's investment ideas were captured within these items.
All right, then let's have the second reading, please.
Bill 9240, second reading. An ordinance calling for a general obligation bond election in the city of Webster Groves, Missouri for the purpose of funding various park and recreational improvements in the city and authorizing certain actions in connection therewith.
Thank you. Council members, is there anyone who would like to remove anything from the consent agenda? Right, Councilmember Smith, could you call for its approval, please?
I call for the approval of the consent agenda and its subsequent adoptions.
second.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss. Yes. Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
All right, we have appointed Ginger Garrett reappointed her to the Green Space Advisory Commission, and that, I believe, ends our public meeting. I believe we do have a closed session.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Bliss?
Yes, I would like to call for an executive closed session regarding attorney-client privileged communications, Missouri statute 610.021, open parens 1, close parens, and negotiated contract, Missouri statute 610.021, open parens 1, 2, close parens.
Is there a second?
Anything else?
No, second. I'm the second girl.
All right, we're ready.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss. Yes. Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
All right, thank you all very much for being here this evening.